So, picture this. It's the year 636.
Sure.
Right. And you have this massive Roman army, basically the undisputed superpower of the whole Mediterranean.
Right. The absolute heavyweights.
Exactly. And they are staring down this ragged, incredibly outnumbered force out in the blistering heat of the Syrian desert.
And you have to remember the Romans had, centuries of institutional military doctrine behind them. Heavy cavalry, impenetrable supply lines.
Yeah, and the opposing force has like a fraction of their numbers and basically no formal state infrastructure. But somehow, within 6 days, that massive Roman army is just completely annihilated.
Completely wiped out.
Right. And with it, this 900-year-old global world order is permanently shattered. So today we're dissecting exactly how that happened.
Because it is, frankly, the most rapid, comprehensive reorganization of human society in recorded history.
It really is.
And, to understand it, we really have to look past just the battlefield. We have to examine the ideological engine that drove all of this.
Well, welcome to this edition of The Deep Dive. Our mission today is to explore this incredible historical account of Islam spanning from 5770 all the way to 1453.
Which is a massive undertaking.
I mean, we are attempting something incredibly ambitious here. We're capturing roughly 900 years of the fastest societal transformation the world has ever seen, all in one sitting.
Right, and it's important to frame this properly for everyone listening.
Yeah, because what strikes me instantly as we look at this timeline is that this isn't just, a ledger of dates and dynasties and troop movement.
No, not at all.
It's the story of how a single man, sitting quietly in a mountain cave, sparked a movement that totally outpaced the Roman Empire, bridged 3 continents, and shifted the entire center of global knowledge.
And the overarching theme we're going to see play out again and again today is this friction between synthesis and transformation.
Right.
Because over the course of this deep dive, we'll examine how a deeply held, intensely personal faith collided with the incredibly complex and often, brutal realities of statecraft.
Yeah, how spiritual brotherhood clashes with raw human ambition.
Exactly. And perhaps most importantly, we're going to dissect how a fundamental message of absolute human equality repeatedly disrupted the global status quo.
Because it really did. Sometimes destroying empires and sometimes fracturing the Islamic State from within.
Right.
So I want to pull you, the listener, right into this thought experiment. Imagine yourself living in the late 6th century. If you look at the global map, you basically have 2 massive dominant superpowers.
Right. You've got the Sasanian Empire, which is Persian, and the Byzantine Empire, which is Eastern Rome.
But what is the actual condition of these empires at this exact moment in history?
I mean, in a word, exhaustion. Total systemic exhaustion.
Really? Just completely drained?
Yeah. By the late 500s, the Byzantines and the Sasanians had been fighting these endless, incredibly bloody wars against each other for decades.
Wow.
They're locked in what modern strategists would call a forever war. I mean, they're still standing, technically, but their treasuries are...
So they're bleeding themselves dry.
Exactly. Their populations are heavily taxed, they're resentful, and the empires are ideologically hollowed out.
Right, so the strongs do whatever they want.
Yeah, systemic oppression is just the baseline of governance. Human life, especially, the life of a peasant or a conscript, is incredibly cheap.
Okay, so you have these 2 bleeding titans dominating the known world. But the story we're tracking today, it kind of ignores them completely at the start.
It does. It completely bypasses the centers of power.
Right, it zooms in on a place that geographically and politically shouldn't matter at all. Mecca.
Mecca is basically in the middle of nowhere.
Looking at a map of the era, it's just surrounded by this harsh, unforgiving desert. No central authority, no emperor, no police force.
No standing army either.
Right. Your only safety net is your bloodline, your tribe. If you don't have tribal protection, you are utterly vulnerable.
You're completely exposed. But, Mecca did possess 2 crucial advantages that made it this perfect incubator for what was about to happen.
Okay, what were they?
Well, first, it sat directly on these vital north-south trade routes, connecting the Yemenite kingdoms up to the Mediterranean.
Oh, okay. The money flow.
Exactly.
Wow.
And second, it held something ancient, this cubic stone structure called the Kaaba.
Which originally, if you go all the way back to the patriarch Abraham, was built specifically for monotheism, right?
Right, for Tawhid. The belief in a single unseen God.
But by the time we hit the late 6th century, that original purpose was just entirely buried.
Completely lost it.
Yeah, this era is known as the Jahiliyyah, the age of deep darkness or ignorance. And the Kaaba had become this crowded pantheon with like 360 different tribal idols.
And we really have to understand that this physical corruption of the Kaaba, filling it with statues to appease every passing trade caravan, it was a direct reflection of a much deeper decay.
Like a moral decay in the society.
Yeah, sociological and moral. Mecca had become hyper-capitalist in the most ruthless sense imaginable.
Wow.
It was a place where the vulnerable orphans, the poor, women, slaves, they had absolutely no intrinsic value.
Right. You were only worth what wealth or muscle you could bring to your clan.
Exactly.
And there's this specific practice from this time that just absolutely stops you in your tracks. It perfectly illustrates this darkness.
Female infanticide.
Yeah, the normalization of female infanticide.
They said.
Let's talk about the mechanics of this, because it wasn't some dark hidden secret, was it?
No, it was entirely normalized.
A father, upon discovering his wife had given birth to a daughter, would feel this sense of social shame, or maybe foresee a financial burden.
Right.
So he would literally take his newborn baby out of the desert, dig a hole, and bury her alive in the sand.
It's horrifying.
And society just accepted this as a perfectly rational, normal economic decision.
And that right there is the defining characteristic of the Jahiliyyah. It's a society functioning purely on the rawest, most cruel mechanics of pride and survival.
Just zero empathy.
An environment completely devoid of universal human rights. Empathy was literally seen as a weakness, ruthless pragmatism to the law.
Which, sets the stage for a massive geopolitical trigger event around the year 570, the year of the elephant.
This is such a fascinating moment in history.
It is. Down south in Yemen, you have this Abyssinian governor named Abraha, and he decides he wants to shift the economic and religious center of gravity away from Mecca.
Right, he wants that pilgrimage revenue for himself.
So he builds this magnificent, glaring cathedral in Sania. He fully expects all the Arab tribes to just abandon Mecca and flock to his new center.
But they don't.
No.
Yeah.
The Arabs completely ignore it. They keep making their pilgrimage to their ancient, simple stone structure out in the desert.
And for a man like Abraha, an imperial governor, this is just an unbearable wound to his pride and his political authority.
He expects absolute submission.
Exactly. When he doesn't get it, he decides to just eliminate the competition. He figures if he physically levels the Kaaba, the Arabs will have absolutely no choice but to redirect their trade.
Makes brutal sense.
So he mobilizes this massive, overwhelming military force. We are talking about an army of roughly 60,000 highly trained soldiers.
And he brings 9 giant elephants, led by this massive war elephant named Mahmud.
Right.
And I want to emphasize what an elephant meant in this context, because to an Arab nomad in the 6th century, an armored war elephant wasn't just like an animal.
He was a weapon of mass destruction.
Exactly. It's the ancient equivalent of rolling an unstoppable tank division into a tiny defenseless village.
It's pure psychological warfare.
It's a weapon so overwhelmingly foreign that your enemy's logic just dictates they must surrender without firing a single arrow. You literally have no concept of how to defeat it.
It was explicitly meant to induce absolute paralyzing terror. As Abraha's army marches north toward Mecca, they are just crushing everything in their path.
Right.
Smaller, proud tribes try to mount a resistance, and they're just effortlessly scattered. Taif, which is a major fortified city nearby, takes one look at the army and immediately surrenders.
So by the time the news reaches Mecca, the city's leadership realizes they have absolutely zero military response.
None. They don't even attempt a defense.
The leader of Mecca at the time, Abdul Muttalib, assesses the situation, realizes it's completely hopeless, and tells his people to evacuate.
They literally flee to the surrounding mountains to watch their city be destroyed.
But before he leaves, Abdul Muttalib does something fascinating. He marches right into Abraha's camp to negotiate.
Right.
But he doesn't ask for the city to be spared. He just asks for his stolen camels back.
It's such a wild detail.
Abraha is confused, basically saying, I am here to destroy your holy sanctuary, and you only care about your camels.
Yeah.
And Abdul Muttalib delivers this incredible, iconic line. He says, I am the owner of the camels, but the Kaaba has an owner who will protect it.
It is a statement of profound, quiet resignation.
Really?
He's acknowledging the absolute limit of his human agency. He can secure his livestock, but the sanctuary is fundamentally beyond his jurisdiction. He just leaves it entirely to divine.
And the climax of this standoff is just surreal. Abraha's army is at the very borders of Mecca. The order is given to charge. But Mahmud, the giant lead elephant, simply stops.
Just refuses to move.
He refuses to take a single step forward toward the Kaaba. They beat him, they strike him with iron hooks, but he just drops to his knees.
And the historical accounts detail this fascinating anomaly here. If the handlers turned Mahmud south, east, or west, he would immediately stand up and trot in that direction.
Wow.
But the exact moment they turned him back toward Mecca, he collapsed. He completely refused to advance.
And because elephants are herd animals conditioned to follow the lead, the other elephants mirrored his behavior, right?
Exactly. The vanguard of the army just ground to a halt as if hitting a physical wall.
And then the skies darken.
Yeah.
But it is at the storm front is a massive, unimaginable flock of birds.
The ababil birds.
Right. They're described as coming in from the coast. They completely blot out the sun, and they start dropping these small, hardened, baked clay stones from their beaks and claws.
It's like a deadly hailstorm moving at terminal velocity.
These stones just tear through armor and flesh, decimating Abraha's army. The soldiers panic, the elephants stampede back through their own lines, and Abraham himself is struck and dies as they try to retreat.
This invincible, technologically superior army is completely, utterly annihilated.
Which is just wild to think about.
And if we evaluate the historical impact of this event, it is profound.
Yeah.
Because this wasn't a myth whispered in a tent,
Yeah.
It was a highly visible, massively publicized geopolitical disaster for the Abyssinians.
Everyone saw it happen.
Exactly. It broadcasted to all the surrounding tribes and to the empires watching from afar that Mecca was under a terrifying, tangible, divine protection.
It elevated the geopolitical and spiritual status of the city overnight.
Which sets the perfect dramatic stage. Because the very next year, in 571, in a city now buzzing with this aura of divine intervention, a child is born. A child who would face profound, compounding tragedy almost immediately. Muhammad was born on April 20th, 571, but his father, Abdullah, had died months earlier on a trade journey.
So he was an orphan before he even took his first breath.
Exactly. And the heartbreak is just relentless.
Yeah, his mother, Amina, takes him to visit his father's grave in Yathrib, but on the journey back, she falls ill and dies. He's only 6 years old.
So
He's taken in by his grandfather, Abdul Muttalib, the very man who faced down Abraha's army. But his grandfather passes away 2 years.
Right.
Finally, his uncle, Abu Talib, becomes his primary guardian. Think about the psychology here. Before he's even fully a boy, he has lost every primary anchor a child is supposed to have.
In a society where your family is your only armor, he is stripped of it repeatedly.
Which forces this very early, very raw exposure to the realities of life, right?
Definitely. Unlike the sons of the Meccan elite, he doesn't grow up sheltered in luxury. He works as a shepherd, tending flocks in the harsh landscape.
That's stout me.
Yeah, and later, he travels on trade caravans all the way up to Syria. He's out in the world, closely observing the stark realities of Meccan commerce and society from the bottom up.
He's seeing the cheating in the markets, the casual cruelty of the slave trade, the deep arrogance of the tribal leaders who treat human beings as commodities.
But what is vital here is his reaction to it.
Right, he doesn't absorb that toxicity.
No, he doesn't become cynical or ruthless just to survive.
Yeah.
He remains completely distinct from the corruption.
In fact, the very people running this corrupt system literally nickname him Al-Amin, the trustworthy one.
We really need to pause on that title, Al-Amin. It wasn't a self-proclaimed moniker,
Yeah.
It was a title bestowed upon him by a society that inherently did not value honesty, yet found themselves completely unable to deny his.
Even the most ruthless merchants would leave their valuables with him for safekeeping.
Exactly. It tells us that long before any claim to prophethood, his character, his baseline integrity was his most prominent, undeniable feature.
And that profound character is exactly what catches the eye of Khadija.
Right.
She's this highly respected, powerful, wealthy businesswoman in Mecca. She needs someone reliable to lead her major trade caravan to Syria.
So she hires him.
Right, and when he returns, she sees not just incredible profit, but a report of his absolute honesty and competence.
She's so impressed that she breaks convention and actually proposes marriage to him.
He is 25, she is 40, and their partnership becomes the absolute bedrock of his life.
Yet, even with this newfound worldly stability, a deeply loving marriage, financial security, the universal respect of his community, there's a growing internal unrest within him.
Like a spiritual restlessness.
Yeah. As he reaches his late 30s, he becomes increasingly disturbed by the spiritual and moral empty society.
Right.
He knows the 360 idols in the Kaaba are just lifeless stone, but he doesn't yet know the ultimate truth. And this cognitive dissonance basically drives him into isolation.
So he starts taking provisions and retreating to a small cave called Hira, near the peak of Jabal al-Nur, the Mountain of Light, just outside the city.
He wants to escape the noise, the commerce, the arrogance of Mecca to just, think.
To see clarity in the crushing silence of the desert mountains.
And that brings us to the moment that literally splits history. It's the month of Ramadan in the year 610.
Okay.
He is 40 years old, alone in the darkness of the cave. And suddenly, the silence is violently broken. The angel Jibril, or Gabriel, appears to him.
The command given to him is simple, but it's terrifying. Read or recite.
Right.
And Muhammad is completely overwhelmed. He's an unlettered man in an oral society. He doesn't know how to read text. He replies, "I cannot read."
And then the angel physically embraces him.
Right, squeezing him until he feels he might die and releases him. The command comes again, heavier, again. "I cannot read." Another terrifying embrace.
It's intense.
Finally, the third command. "Read in the name of your Lord who created man from a clinging substance. Read, and your Lord is the most generous, who taught by the pen, taught man that which he knew not."
What is most striking to you about the psychology of this exact moment?
Honestly, it's the absolute lack of Hollywood heroism.
Yes.
In hero myths, the chosen one receives their power and instantly strikes a pose, filled with confident destiny, ready to take on the world.
Right, they embrace it immediately.
But here, he doesn't leave the cave feeling like a victorious demigod. He is absolutely terrified.
He is physically shaking, his heart is pounding.
Yeah, he runs all the way down the mountain, bursts into his home, and begs Khadija, "Cover me, cover me." He literally thinks he might be losing his mind or that he has been possessed by a desert spirit.
And this psychological realism is a vital piece of evidence for the authentic experience.
How so?
Because prophethood did not begin with arrogant confidence or calculated ambition, It began with profound, overwhelming human fear.
The crushing burden of the divine making contact with the mortal.
Exactly. And this is where Khadija's role becomes historically monumental.
Right.
When he tells her what happened, she doesn't doubt him, she doesn't panic, and she doesn't tell him he's crazy. She immediately affirms his sanity based on his lifelong character.
She reminds him of who he is.
Right. She essentially says, "God would never humiliate you, for you are good to your relatives, you are true to your word, you help those who are in need, and you support the weak."
Wow.
She believes in him before anyone else does. That emotional and psychological anchor is what allowed the movement to survive its very first, most fragile night.
It's just a brilliant crisis intervention on her part. And soon after, the nature of the revelation changes, doesn't it?
It does.
It shifts from this private, terrifying internal experience in a cave to a public mandate. The command comes down, "Rise and warn."
The secret is out. He has to take this to the streets.
Which instantly brings us into a massive conflict.
Yeah.
Because the moment you rise and warn, you're no longer just a quiet mystic on a mountain. You're actively challenging the existing sociopolitical order.
You're threatening the entire system.
Now, I want to push back on this for a second because a modern listener might be confused. Why did the Meccans care so much?
It's a fair question.
They already had a pantheon of 360 gods in the Kaaba. Polytheism is inherently pluralistic, right? What's the big deal about adding one more god to the roster?
Mm-hmm.
Why was him preaching a new religion such an existential issue for them?
Because this was never just a theological dispute. It was a massive socioeconomic earthquake. The message of Islam wasn't just, please add this god to your collection. It was, there is only one God, those idols are entirely fake, and therefore the system you built around them is...
Wow.
And furthermore, it said, before this one God, every single human being is entirely It directly rejected the concept of tribal superiority. It rejected the divide between the uber-wealthy elite and the destitute.
Okay, so it threatened their capital and their hierarchy.
Exactly.
It was a declaration of war on the social structure that kept men like Abu Jahl and Abu Lahab in absolute power. Like, if the idols are fake, the pilgrim trade dries up.
Yep.
If humans are equal, the slave trade is immoral.
Precisely. When you look a powerful, wealthy slave owner in the eye and tell him that he is spiritually, fundamentally equal to the person he owns, you are destroying his entire worldview.
You're dismantling his authority.
And power never yields without a fight.
And the Meccan elite reacted with sheer, unadulterated brutality. By 613, the call goes public. The prophet stands on Mount Safa and addresses the tribes.
And the elite quickly realize they can't debate him intellectually.
Because the language of the Quran is mesmerizing and his character is flawless.
Right, so they decide to crush him and his followers physically.
And the early converts are largely the most vulnerable people in the city, right?
Yeah, slaves, orphans, the impoverished, people without tribal shield.
The torture was just systematic and horrific. It was designed to make an example of them. We have the accounts of the Yasir family, who are dragged out into the burning desert sands and tortured, becoming the very first martyrs of Islam.
And then there's Bilal al-Habashi, an enslaved man of Ethiopian descent.
His story is incredible.
It really is. His master dragged him out into the midday sun, pinned him to the scorching sand, and placed a massive, suffocating boulder on his chest, demanding he renounce his faith and acknowledge the idols.
But Bilal's response is just legendary. Crueler under a rock, baking in the sun, unable to even breathe properly, he refuses to give them the satisfaction. He just keeps repeating one word, Ahad, Ahad, one, one. God is one.
That singular word proved that this new faith had provided something that physical torture simply couldn't break.
Right.
It provided an internal liberation that superseded physical bondage. But the Meccan elite escalated.
They didn't stop there.
No. When physical torture of individuals failed to stop the movement, they instituted a total systemic, economic, and social boycott against the Muslims and anyone from Muhammad's clan who protected.
They literally pushed them out of the city center into a barren ravine, a rocky valley, and cut off all trade, all intermarriage, and all food supplies.
For 3 years.
A 3-year suffocating embargo. The Muslims were reduced to eating tree bark, boiling old leather from shields, and sucking the moisture out of roots just to survive.
It was essentially an open-air concentration camp.
And eventually the boycott only ended because some non-Muslims in Mecca just couldn't stomach the cruelty anymore. They heard the cries of starving children echoing from the valley at night, and they broke the pact out of sheer human guilt.
But the lifting of the boycott did not mean relief.
No.
The physical toll had been devastating, because shortly after they emerged from the valley, the year 619 arrives, a year known forever in Islamic history as the Year of Sorrow.
Khadija, his wife, his anchor, the very first believer who had exhausted her entire fortune feeding the Muslims during the boycott, falls ill and dies.
It's heartbreaking.
And mere weeks later, his uncle Abu Talib, who had provided him crucial tribal protection despite never converting himself, also passes away.
Suddenly, the two pillars of his life are gone.
Muhammad is completely exposed. The tribal shield is shattered. Mecca is effectively a death trap for him now. Any man on the street could kill him without facing tribal retribution.
He realizes that the mission cannot survive in Mecca under these conditions. He has to find a new base of operations, a sanctuary.
Right.
So he makes the agonizing decision to travel by foot to the nearby fortified city of Taif, hoping to persuade their leaders to offer him protection.
But the leaders of Taif don't just reject his theological message. They violently humiliate him.
They do.
They fear Meccan retaliation, so they order the street children, the gangs, and the slaves to chase him out of the city. They line the path and pelt him with stones.
They stone him relentlessly.
Until he collapses, his shoes literally pooling with his own blood. His adopted son, Zaid, is desperately throwing his own body over the prophet to shield him, taking gashes to his own head.
It is an incredibly dark, agonizing, lonely moment.
And it's in this moment of absolute physical exhaustion and emotional devastation, resting in a small orchard outside Taif, wiping the blood from his face, that tradition says the angel Jibril appears to him again.
And Jibril is accompanied by the angel of the mountains.
Right. And they offer him a choice. They tell him, essentially, give the command and I will bring the two mountains that surround Taif together, completely crushing the city and everyone in it.
And from a purely human standpoint, this is a completely justifiable moment for revenge.
I mean, who wouldn't say yes to that after what he just endured? They just tried to beat him to death.
Exactly. But he refuses. He looks at the blood, he looks at the city, and he says no. He says, I hope that God will bring forth from their descendants people who will worship God alone.
That is just staggering.
It raises a foundational point about the core ethos of his mission. It was entirely rooted in mercy, not vengeance.
Yeah.
Even at his absolute lowest, bleeding, rejected, and humiliated, his instinct was compassion for a future generation, not the destruction of the present one. He was building a civilization, not seeking personal.
But practically speaking, he is still bleeding, Mecca is unlivable, and Taifa just violently expelled him. He needs a lifeline.
Desperately.
And the seeds for that lifeline are planted secretly during the annual pilgrimage season back in Mecca, when he meets a small group of pilgrims from an agricultural city to the north called Yathrib,
which will later be known as Medina.
Right.
The socio-political climate of Yathrib is key here. They listen to him, and they're deeply intrigued by his message of unity.
Why?
Because their own city was tearing itself apart in decades of bloody, exhausted tribal warfare between two major factions. They needed an outside arbitrator, someone with unquestionable integrity, to come in and stop the bleeding.
And they recognize him as that leader.
Exactly. This leads to secret meetings in the dead of night, known as the Pledges of Aqaba, where they agree to take him in and protect him with their lives.
Which sets the stage for the defining moment of the era, the Hijra in 622, the Great Escape.
But the Meccan leaders aren't blind, right?
No. They realize that if he leaves Mecca and establishes an independent political base in Medina, sitting right alongside their northern trade routes, he ceases to be a local nuisance and becomes a massive geopolitical threat.
They have to kill him before he leaves.
But how do you kill him without sparking a civil war with his remaining clan? They come up with a brilliant, sinister political calculation.
It's ruthless.
They decide to select one strong youth from every single tribe in Mecca. These youths will surround his house at night and plunge their swords into him at the exact same time.
It's the ultimate diffusion of responsibility. Shared guilt. His clan cannot possibly declare a blood feud against every single tribe in the city simultaneously. It is a foolproof assassination plot.
But it fails. Muhammad learns of the plot. He has his young cousin Ali sleep in his bed wearing his cloak as a decoy. Then, under the cover of darkness, Muhammad miraculously slips right past the assassins waiting outside his door.
He and his closest companion, Abu Bakr, slip out of the city and hide in a cave for 3 days while Meccan bounty hunters scour the desert.
Coming so close that Abu Bakr can literally see their feet from inside the cave.
Talk about tension.
But against all odds, they evade capture. They make the grueling journey north, and they finally arrive in Medina.
And the arrival in Medina is one of the most cinematic moments. You have the people of the city who had been waiting anxiously for days, finally seeing him on the horizon.
They line the streets, men, women, and children, singing the famous song, Tala al-Badru Alaina, the full moon has risen over us. It's a moment of profound collective joy and relief.
It really is.
And I absolutely love the logistical detail of how he chooses where to build his headquarters.
Oh, this is great.
Everyone in Medina wants to host him. Everyone is grabbing the halter of his camel, wanting the prestige of having the prophet reside in their home.
Right. It's a huge honor.
To avoid playing favorites or causing immediate tribal jealousy, he just lets go of the reins of his camel, Kaswa, and says, "Let her go, for she is under divine command. I will settle where she kneels."
The camel wanders through the city and eventually kneels down in a dusty plot used for drawing dates, owned by 2 orphan boys.
He insists on paying the orphans a fair price for the land, and that exact spot becomes the Masjid an-Nabawi, the Prophet's mosque.
But we need to recognize that the year 622 isn't just about building a place of worship. 622 is the year the official Islamic calendar is, year 1.
Why then?
Because this is the moment the movement transforms from a persecuted spiritual call into a functional sovereign state.
And the very first thing he does as head of state is draft a constitution, what's known as the Medina Charter. I know you want to unpack this because it is an incredible leap in political science.
I do, because the Medina Charter is a brilliant, entirely unprecedented piece of early constitutional statecraft. Think about what he is walking into: a city fractured by tribal war, with a mix of Muslims, Jewish tribes, and Arab pagans.
He doesn't force everyone to convert, does he?
No. Instead, he drafts a legal document that recognizes all these disparate groups and unites them into a single political entity, an ummah. It explicitly guaranteed religious freedom. It established a pact of mutual defense. If Medina was attacked, everyone fought together regardless of religion, and it replaced the ancient system of tribal blood revenge with a centralized system of justice. It was an incredibly progressive, pluralistic framework.
And alongside that legal framework, you have this incredible social experiment, the Brotherhood.
Right.
You have the Meccan refugees, the Muhajirun, who literally arrived with nothing but the clothes on their backs.
Yeah.
They left all their wealth behind. And you have the Medinan locals, the Ansar, meaning the helpers.
The Prophet implements an aggressive integration policy.
He literally pairs them up one-to-one. And the Ansar willingly split their homes, their wealth, their tools, and their businesses down the middle with their refugee brothers.
It is an economic and social integration that is almost unheard of in human history.
It really is. You look at modern, highly developed nations today with vast resources, and we struggle deeply with integrating even small populations of refugees. We argue over borders, budgets, and cultural dilution.
Absolutely.
And yet here, a society that just a decade prior was burying its own daughters alive to save money, achieved total voluntary social integration of a destitute refugee population almost overnight.
It shows the sheer transformative power of the ideology he had instilled in them. They viewed their wealth not as personal property, but as a trust.
But of course, the Meccans back south weren't just going to let Medina thrive and threaten their trade routes. The crucible of war was inevitable.
Which brings us to the three great defining battles of this early state: Badr, Uhud, and the Trench.
Let's start with the Battle of Badr in the year 624. The numbers are frankly terrifying.
Yeah.
You have a Muslim force of just 313 poorly equipped men facing a heavily armed, highly confident Meccan army of 1,000 soldiers.
It's a 3-to-1 disadvantage.
And the Meccans have heavy cavalry.
For Medina, this was an existential crisis. If they lose here, the movement is extinguished.
Right.
The Prophet spends the entire night in a desperate weeping prayer in his tent, stating that if this small group falls today, there will be no one left on earth to truly worship God. The psychological pressure was immense.
And then the terrain shifts the odds. A nighttime rainstorm sweeps through the valley. And let's look at the military mechanics of this.
Right, the terrain is crucial here.
For the Muslims, who had positioned themselves on sandy ground, the rain packed the loose sand tightly, giving their infantry solid footing. But for the Meccans, positioned lower down, the rain turned their ground into thick, slippery mud.
Which entirely neutralizes the speed and shock value of their heavy cavalry and exhausts their armored infantry.
In the morning, the battle commences, and it's a stunning, overwhelming victory for the Muslims. The Meccan leadership is decimated.
Abu Jahl, the man who had tortured Bilal and orchestrated the early persecution, is killed in combat.
It was a massive psychological victory. It proved that discipline, faith, and strategy could topple the giants of the old aristocratic system.
But the Meccans weren't done.
No, they are deeply humiliated. The very next year, 625, they come back, seeking blood revenge. This is the Battle of Uhud.
And this time, they bring a massive force of 3,000 soldiers, including elite cavalry.
The Prophet marches out to meet them at Mount Uhud with only 700 men. And here we see a masterclass in defensive strategy, totally undone by humans.
Prophet surveys the battlefield. He knows he's outnumbered and vulnerable to cavalry. So he places 50 archers on a strategic, elevated mountain pass guarding the Muslim left flank.
He gives them strict, unequivocal orders. Do not leave this position under any circumstances. Whether we are winning and gathering loot or losing and being slaughtered, do not leave your post.
They were the absolute linchpin of the entire defense.
And the battle starts incredibly well for Medina. The Muslim infantry fights fiercely. They push the larger Meccan force back. The Meccans break line and start to retreat in chaos, dropping their camp supplies and valuables as they flee.
And this is where the human element destroys the strategy.
The archers up on the pass look down. They see the enemy fleeing, and they see the loot scattered on the ground. They assume the battle is over.
Right. Ignoring the pleas of their commander, the vast majority of them abandon their post and run down the hill to get their share of the spoils.
Which is exactly the fatal error that Khalid ibn Walid, a brilliant Meccan cavalry commander at the time, was waiting for.
Khalid sees the archers abandon the pass. He immediately wheels his heavy cavalry around the mountain, charges through the now empty pass, and hits the Muslim infantry directly.
Total bloody chaos ensued. The Muslims are caught in a devastating pincer movement. The Meccan infantry stops retreating and turns back around. The Muslims are being slaughtered.
The Meccans fiercely target the Prophet himself, trying to cut the head off the...
A rock smashes his helmet, driving the metal link deep into his cheek. An arrow hits his face, his tooth is broken, and he falls into a pit, bleeding heavily.
A rumor spreads across the battlefield that the Prophet is dead, and the Muslim army completely shatters.
70 companions, including the Prophet's beloved, fierce uncle Hamza, are martyred and their bodies mutilated.
Uhud was a brutal, devastating lesson. It taught them that initial success is fragile. Winning the first clash wasn't enough. Abandoning overarching discipline and long-term strategy for short-term material gain nearly cost them their entire existence.
It was a purification by fire.
It was.
So they absorbed that painful lesson, and they need every ounce of that discipline. Because 2 years later, in 627, the Meccans decide to end Medina once and for all.
They used their vast wealth to form a massive coalition of Arab tribes, 10,000 soldiers strong, and march north.
The Muslims can only muster about 3,000 men to defend the city. This is the Battle of the Trench.
And here we see the incredible intellectual flexibility of the Islamics. They don't rely on traditional Arab warfare, which was essentially just meeting in an open field and clashing.
Right.
A Persian companion, Salman al-Farisi, suggests a tactic entirely foreign to the Arabian Peninsula, digging a massive, impassable trench across the only vulnerable northern approach.
It's an engineering marvel born of desperation. The Prophet himself is down in the dirt, striking the rocks with a pickaxe, starving alongside his men, digging this trench.
The massive Meccan coalition arrives expecting an easy slaughter. They see this vast ditch and they are completely baffled.
Their horses won't jump it, and if infantry tries to climb down into it, they're easy targets for Muslim archers. So it turns into a tense, agonizing, weeks-long siege.
The psychological pressure inside Medina was immense, with supplies running out and rumors of internal betrayal. But eventually, the logistics of keeping 10,000 men fed in the desert begin to fail the Meccans.
And then, nature intervenes again. A violent, freezing windstorm rips through the valley at night. It blows away the Meccan tents, overturns their cooking pots, extinguishes their fires, and creates absolute misery.
The tribal coalition, already annoyed by the lack of combat, fractures. They lose their resolve, pack up in the night, and retreat.
Medina survives through pure strategic innovation, physical endurance, and a timely weather event.
Which perfectly sets up what I consider to be the most mind-bending political maneuver in this entire 900-year story. The year is 628.
The Prophet makes a shocking announcement. He says he wants to go back to Mecca to perform the Umrah, the minor pilgrimage to the Kaaba.
He sets out with 1,400 followers, but here is the catch. They are completely unarmed, save for sheathed traveling swords. They are wearing only the two simple, unstitched white towels of the pilgrim robe.
It is a brilliant high-stakes provocation. Fighting during the sacred months was strictly forbidden by ancient Arab tradition.
He's daring the Meccans to make a move.
If they let the Muslims in, they are publicly acknowledging Medina's right to the Kaaba and admitting defeat. If they violently block unarmed pilgrims, they violate their own deeply held sacred laws and destroy their prestige among all the Arab tribes.
The Meccans panic. They send cavalry out to block them at a place called Hudaybiyah, just outside the sacred precinct.
The two sides sit down to negotiate, and the resulting treaty they find looks, on paper, like an embarrassing, humiliating defeat for the Muslims.
The terms were shockingly asymmetrical. The Muslims were told they could not perform the pilgrimage that year. They had to turn around, go home, and try again next year.
And the extradition clause was heavily skewed, right?
Yes. If a Meccan fled to Medina and converted, the Muslims had to return him to Mecca. But if a Muslim renounced his faith and fled to Mecca, the Meccans got to keep.
The companions are absolutely furious. Men like Umar are practically shaking with anger. They think they're surrendering to polytheists.
But the Prophet quietly signs it.
And as they are walking back to Medina, deeply depressed. The Quran comes down, calling this deeply unequal treaty a clear victory. I'm going to pause here. How on earth is signing a treaty where you get nothing you asked for a victory? Let's unpack the mechanics of this strategy.
The victory was hidden in the primary clause of the treaty, a guaranteed 10-year truce. It was a cessation of hostilities.
Okay.
The Prophet understood something his commanders didn't yet see. The only thing stopping the massive spread of Islam was the constant deafening noise of war. By securing a decade of peace, two things happened. First, he gained official diplomatic recognition from Mecca as a legitimate, equal rival state.
That's huge.
And second, and more importantly, the peace allowed Muslims and non-Muslims to mingle safely. It allowed the message to spread through calm conversation, through shared trade, without the immediate barrier of swords and shields. When people could actually hear the message without fear of combat, the conversion rate exceeded.
The pen was infinitely mightier than the sword here. Even that unequal extradition clause brilliantly backfired on the Meccan.
Right, because new Muslims who escaped Mecca couldn't legally go to Medina under the treaty. They didn't go back. Instead, they just formed their own independent, heavily armed camps along the coast, completely outside Meccan or Medinan jurisdiction.
They started relentlessly harassing Meccan trade routes until the Meccan economy was bleeding so badly, they literally begged the Prophet to cancel that clause and take the refugees into Medina.
It was a political masterstroke.
And it led directly to the historical climax. By 630, allied tribes of the Meccans had blatantly violated the terms of the treaty by attacking allies of Medina. The truce was broken.
The Prophet marches south on Mecca, but this time he is not a hunted exile sneaking out in the night. He arrives with an overwhelming force of 10,000 disciplined soldiers.
And here is where, historically, you expect the bloodbath. You expect the ultimate cathartic revenge. Think about what the Meccans did: the torture, the starvation boycott, the assassination attempts, the mutilation of bodies at Uhud.
By every metric of ancient warfare, Mecca is about to be put to...
But the conquest of Mecca is completely, astonishingly bloodless. It's an epic demonstration of restraint and supreme forgiveness.
The Meccans surrender, terrified. The Prophet gathers them and asks, "What do you think I will do with you?" They plead for mercy, and he quotes the Prophet Joseph forgiving his brothers, saying, "There is no blame on you today. Go, for you are free."
He issues a general amnesty to the very people who murdered his family and friends.
Then he walks up to the Kaaba, the sanctuary he was driven from. He takes his staff, and one by one, he physically pushes over and smashes the 360 idols, declaring, "Truth has come and falsehood has vanished."
The ideological grip of the Jahiliyyah is physically broken.
It's an incredible moment of closure.
But he doesn't just stop at unifying Mecca and Medina. He starts looking at the whole world. He begins sending diplomatic letters. And I find this so remarkably audacious.
It really is bold.
He sends letters to the Emperor of Byzantium, Heraclius, to the Khazar of Persia, and to the Muqawqis, the ruler of Egypt.
The message was essentially, submit to Islam and you will be safe. Acknowledge the one God.
Right. Put yourself in the sandals of the Byzantine emperor. You're the heir to Rome. You rule half the known world. You've just defeated the Persians in a massive war. And a courier arrives with a letter from a man in a desert town you've barely heard of, telling you to submit your empire to his new faith.
It must have looked utterly absurd, like a joke.
But history is deeply ironic, because within just a few short decades, every single one of those massive ancient empires would either completely collapse or lose their most vital, wealthy territories to the very movement that sent those seemingly absurd letters.
The geopolitical center of gravity was about to violently shift.
Which brings us to the year 632, the farewell Hajj. The Prophet returns to Mecca for pilgrimage, addressing a massive crowd of 100,000 Muslims.
And the sermon he delivers, it is basically a universal declaration of human rights delivered centuries before the European Enlightenment.
It is the ethical culmination of his entire 23-year mission. He doesn't talk about military tactics or political expansion. He declares the absolute sanctity of human life and property.
He demands the fair, just treatment of women, holding men accountable before God for how they treat their wives. He abolishes all old blood feuds and usury.
But perhaps most radically for a deeply tribal society, he declares absolute, unequivocal racial equality.
He states that an Arab has no superiority over a non-Arab, A non-Arab has no superiority over an Arab, a white person has no superiority over a black person, and a black person has no superiority over a white person, except in piety and good action.
He crushes the core disease of human tribalism and racism in one single definitive sentence. He ensures the crowd has heard him, tells him to pass the message on to those who aren't there, and then a few months later, back in Medina, he falls severely ill.
He passes away in his modest clay-walled room, whispering his final words, the highest companion, choosing the presence of God over returning to health.
We have to step back and look at what he accomplished. In just 23 years, he went from a terrified, trembling man in a cave to the undisputed leader of a completely unified Arabian Peninsula.
He eradicated centuries of polytheism. He left behind a robust, functioning state framework, a deeply rooted faith, and a revealed text that would shape the daily lives of billions for millennia.
But his death creates an immediate, terrifying vacuum. He is gone. He was the prophet, the judge, the general, the emotional center. The massive question crashing down on Medina is, who takes the wheel?
And how do they keep this incredibly fragile, newly unified society from shattering back into tribal warfare? This plunges us right into the era of the four caliphs, the Rashidun, or rightly guided caliphs.
The immediate aftermath of his death was utter political chaos. The prophet was the glue holding everything together. Without him, many of the distant Arab tribes who had only recently converted made a political calculus.
They decided that their allegiance, and specifically their obligation to pay the zakat tax to Medina, died with Muhammad. They rebelled.
Some completely abandoned Islam, while others raised up false prophets of their own to consolidate local power.
This triggers the Ridda Wars, the Wars of Apostasy. And the man elected by the community to handle this existential crisis is Abu Bakr, the prophet's closest friend and companion in the cave during the Hijrah.
Now, many of the senior companions approach Abu Bakr and tell him to be pragmatic. They say, we are surrounded. Let's compromise with the rebels. Forgive the tax. Just keep them nominally Muslim to avoid a massive civil war.
But Abu Bakr demonstrates incredible steel. He refuses to compromise a single pillar of the faith for political expedience. He declares that if they withhold even a piece of rope that they used to pay during the time of the Prophet, he will fight them.
He understands that if the state yields on its core principles now, the religion will slowly disintegrate into 1,000 local variants.
He sends armies out to systematically crush the rebellions. And the most dangerous, bloody threat comes from a man named Musaylima, a false prophet who had amassed a massive fanatical army of 30,000,
which leads to the horrific Battle of Yamama. Khalid ibn Walid, the same tactical genius who flanked the Muslims at Uhud, but who had since converted and become the premier Muslim commander, leads 13,000 Muslim troops against Musaylima's 40,000.
It is an absolute. The combat is so intense, it's called the Garden.
The Muslims eventually win, and Musaylima is killed, but the losses are staggering. And the most critical, terrifying detail here, 360 men who had memorized the entire Quran by heart are killed in that single battle.
This realization sends shockwaves through Medina. The Quran at this point was written down on scattered palm leaves, flat stones, and pieces of leather, but its primary preservation was in the minds of the men who had memorized it directly from the Prophet.
Umar realizes that if these memorizers keep dying in combat, the actual word of God could be permanently lost.
He goes to Abu Bakr, and this near disaster prompts one of the most important administrative decisions in history. Abu Bakr orders all the written fragments to be collected, verified by 2 witnesses, and officially compiled into a single master-written book to protect the text forever.
So Abu Bakr holds the center. He defeats the rebellions, reunites Arabia, secures the physical text of the Quran, and then passes away just 2 years into his rule. He appoints Umar as his successor.
And under Umar, the second caliph, the map just completely explodes.
If Abu Bakr was the consolidator, Umar is the architect of the global expansion. Under his rule, the Islamic State bursts out of the Arabian Peninsula and directly takes on those 2 exhausted superpowers we discussed at the very beginning, the Byzantines and the Sasanians.
And the military engagements are just mind-boggling in their scale. Let's look back at the Battle of Yarmouk in 636 against the Byzantine Romans that we talked about in the intro.
You have roughly 40,000 Muslim troops facing a massive Byzantine coalition of up to 200,000 soldiers.
But once again, tactical brilliance, mobility, and high morale overcome sheer numbers. Khalid ibn Walid is commanding. He doesn't just charge into the massive Roman phalanxes.
For 6 grueling days, he engages in skirmishes, wearing the heavily armored Byzantines down in the heat, waiting for the perfect moment.
And on the 6th day, a massive, blinding dust storm blows in across the plain. Khalid uses the storm as cover to launch a devastating cavalry flanking maneuver, pushing the massive, confused Byzantine force back to the edge of the steep ravines of the Yarmouk River.
The Roman army crumbles and falls into the gorge. It was a total rout. The Byzantine Emperor Heraclius famously flees, saying, "Farewell, Syria."
And the Persian front is just as dramatic. The Battle of Qadsiya breaks the back of the Sasanian military. The Muslim armies march into the Persian capital.
They find a city of unimaginable luxury. 400 years of hoarded imperial wealth, giant silk carpets depicting gardens with real gems woven into them, a throne of solid gold, mountains of pearls.
They cart it all back to Medina as spoils of war. And when this massive treasure caravan arrives in Medina, Umar, the caliph of the expanding empire, looks at it and starts weeping.
Why does he weep at the moment of his greatest victory?
Because Umar deeply understands the corrupting nature of human psychology. He looks at this unimaginable mountain of gold and realizes that while his people survived poverty, starvation, and persecution in Mecca, this immense wealth might be the cancer that finally corrupts their faith.
He feared it would make them attached to the luxury of the world and cause them to fight amongst.
It's an incredible moment of foresight. He refuses to put the treasure in a vault. He insists on distributing it immediately to the people, keeping virtually nothing for himself.
And speaking of his character, we have to highlight the conquest of Jerusalem. The city is besieged and finally agrees to surrender. But the Patriarch of Jerusalem insists he will only hand the keys of the holy city directly to the Caliph himself.
So Umar travels from Medina to Jerusalem, but he doesn't travel with a royal guard or a golden chariot. He travels with just one servant, and they have only one camel between.
So for the entire journey, they take turns. One rides while the other walks, then they switch.
Now, picture this scene. The most powerful man in the world, whose armies have just shattered 2 ancient empires, arrives at the gates of Jerusalem, and mathematically, it just happens to be the servant's turn to ride the camel.
The generals beg Umar to at least ride the camel for the entrance so he looks regal, but Umar refuses to break the agreement with his servant.
So the caliph, Umar, enters the holy city on foot, covered in dust, wearing patched clothes, holding the reins of the camel while his servant rides upon it.
The beautifully robed Byzantine patriarchs waiting to surrender must have been completely stunned. They had never seen power express itself through such humility. The history books cemented this as the ultimate image of the justice of Umar.
But this rapid, massive expansion inevitably created immense internal administrative and social strain. When Umar is tragically assassinated by a disgruntled Persian captive while leading morning prayers, Uthman is chosen as the 3rd caliph.
And Uthman does some incredible things structurally to hold this massive beast of an empire together. He realizes that as non-Arabs convert, the pronunciation of the Quran is starting to drift.
So he takes the compiled master copy from Abu Bakr's time, standardizes the dialect, and sends identical official copies across the entire global empire to prevent linguistic fracturing.
He also builds the very first Islamic navy, which completely breaks the Byzantine monopoly on the Mediterranean Sea.
But Uthman was an older, very gentle, wealthy man, and he was managing a vastly society than Abu. He was managing a wealthy global empire, and his administrative choices led to accusations of nepotism.
He appointed several members of his own powerful Umayyad clan to key governorships across the provinces.
Whether it was for efficiency or family trust, it sparked deep resentment among the places Egypt and Iraq, who felt the elite of Mecca were hoarding the wealth and power.
This resentment boils over into outright mutiny. Rebels march from the provinces directly to Medina and surround Uthman's house. They besiege him in his own home for over a month.
He refuses to order his guards to attack them, stating he will not be the first to shed Muslim blood, and it ends in absolute tragedy.
The rebels break in and assassinate the 82-year-old Uthman while he is sitting peacefully, reading from the Quran. The historical accounts note his blood spilled directly onto the pages. That spilled blood marks the permanent end of unity. The psychological dam breaks.
It shatters the societal cohesion. Ali, the Prophet's cousin, son-in-law, and one of the earliest believers, is reluctantly chosen as the fourth caliph. But he inherits an absolute nightmare scenario. The empire is deeply traumatized, politically fractured, teetering on the edge of the first Islamic civil war, known as the Fitna.
And the fitna is just agonizing to study because it's Muslims fighting Muslims, companions fighting companions. First, you have the Battle of the Camel, where Ali is forced to fight against an army led by Aisha, the Prophet's widow, who is demanding immediate justice and the execution of Uthman's killers.
Ali wins the battle, but the emotional and psychological toll on the massive. Then comes the real existential crisis, the Battle of Siffin.
This is Ali against Muawiyah, the incredibly powerful, wealthy Umayyad governor of Syria, who refuses to pledge allegiance to Ali until Uthman's killers are brought to justice.
Siffin is a tragedy of political manipulation. The two massive armies clash, and after days of brutal fighting, Ali's forces, pushing hard, are on the verge of a decisive victory.
But Muawiyah's commander, Amr ibn al-As, pulls a desperate, brilliant psychological stunt. He orders his frontline troops to literally tie pages of the Quran to the tips of their spears and raise them high in the air, shouting, "Let the book of God judge between us. Stop shedding Muslim blood."
It is the ultimate weaponization of faith. It forces Ali's troops to a screeching halt. They drop their weapons. They absolutely refuse to attack men holding the Quran.
Ali tries to tell them it's a political trick, but they force Ali to stop the battle and accept human arbitration to settle the dispute.
And the arbitration is a disaster. It is completely inconclusive and politically weakens Ali. But worse than the stalemate, agreeing to arbitration alienated a hardcore puritanical faction of Ali.
They argued that by accepting human negotiation over the clear right of his caliphate, Ali had compromised the faith. Their slogan was, "Judgment belongs only to God."
They physically broke away from his camp, becoming known as the Kharijites, or those who exit. They represent the birth of violent extremism in Islamic history.
They are radicalized. They declare that anyone who commits a major sin or disagrees with their strict political theology is an unbeliever, and therefore their blood is lawful.
They start terrorizing the countryside, slaughtering innocent civilians who refuse to denounce Ali. Ali has to divert his attention to crush them militarily, but the ideology survives underground.
And ultimately, a Kharijite assassin strikes Ali in the head with a poisoned sword while he is leading morning prayers in Kufa. Ali dies, and with him, the era of the rightly guided caliphs, the men who knew the Prophet personally, who governed by consultation and deep piety, comes to a tragic close.
Which fundamentally shifts the nature of the civilization. We transition into the era of dynasties, golden ages, and invasion. The idealism, consultation, and relative austerity of Medina are permanently replaced by the raw, hereditary imperial power of Damascus. Muawiyah assumes the caliphate, a monarchy. The Umayyad.
And the deepest, most bleeding wound of this entire shift happens almost immediately in the year 680, the tragedy of Karbala.
Muawiyah, before his death, forces the community to pledge allegiance to his son Yazid's successor. This completely abandons the traditional Islamic process of consultation and merit-based. Yazid is widely seen as corrupt, unjust, and unfit to.
The Prophet's own grandson, Hussein, refuses to legitimize this tyranny. He refuses to pledge allegiance. He travels toward Kufa with his family and a small group of about 72 devoted supporters, hoping to raise a resistance.
But they are intercepted by Yazid's massive imperial army of thousands at a desolate place called Karbala near the Euphrates.
The cruelty of what happens next is hard to overstate. Yazid's army surrounds Hussein's small camp and completely cuts them off from the river. They deny them water for days under the scorching Iraqi sun. Children are crying from thirst.
And then the army attacks. They massacre them. The Prophet's own grandson, Hussein, the child the Prophet used to kiss and carry on his shoulders, is brutally killed, his head severed. His family is taken in chains.
The massacre at Karbala permanently scarred the consciousness of the Islamic world. It was no longer just a political dispute over who should be caliph. It solidified the Sunni and Shia split, turning political differences into a deep, enduring theological agony.
For the Shia, Karbala becomes the ultimate paradigm of suffering, martyrdom, and the cosmic struggle of justice against tyranny. It remains a bleeding wound in the civilization.
Yet, despite this massive internal trauma, militarily, the Umayyad Empire was an absolute juggernaut. They expanded the borders at a staggering rate, reaching from the shores of the Atlantic in Spain all the way to the borders of India.
In 711, a commander named Tariq ibn Ziyad lands on the... He looks at his small force, looks at the massive Visigoth army gathering against them, and he literally orders his own boats to be burned on the...
He tells his men, "The sea is behind you, the enemy is in front of you, there is no retreat." They conquer Spain, laying the foundation for Al-Andalus, which would become a beacon of European civilization.
But there's a glaring, fatal irony in the Umayyad project. They were building this massive global empire under the banner of Islam, but for the sake of power and revenue, they abandoned the core foundational principle. The Umayyads instituted an institutionalized racist policy known as the Mawali.
Let's delve into how this functioned, because it is the exact opposite of the farewell sermon. If you were a Berber in North Africa or a Persian in the East and you converted to Islam, you theoretically should have the exact same rights and tax exemption as an Arab from Mecca.
But the Umayyads needed vast tax revenues to fund their armies and their luxury, so they classified non-Arab Muslims as Mawali, second-class citizens. They forced them to pay the higher taxes usually reserved for non-Muslims, and they excluded them from high-ranking military and political positions.
They essentially replaced the universal egalitarian Islamic Brotherhood with narrow Arab ethnic nationalism, and that was their fatal flaw. You cannot preach a religion that explicitly demands absolute racial equality and then try to run a massive empire based on ethnic supremacy. The cognitive dissonance becomes unbearable for the population.
It mathematically guarantees a revolution. Exactly what happens in 750. The Abbasid revolution sweeps out of the eastern province of Khorasan, flying black banners demanding equality and justice. They completely overthrow the Umayyads, wiping out the ruling family.
And the geopolitical center of power shifts again, moving east from Damascus to a newly built circular city in Iraq, Baghdad.
The Abbasid era is where we see true intellectual maturation. It's no longer primarily about rapid military expansion. It's about synthesis and consolidation. Baghdad becomes a cosmopolitan melting. The racist Mawali policy completely scrapped. Persians, Arabs, and eventually Turks are all integrated in a state apparatus based on merit. The civilization turns its vast wealth toward the pursuit of knowledge.
This is the golden age. You get the establishment of the Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom, in Baghdad. And this wasn't just a library. It was a massive state-funded research.
They are sending emissaries across the world to pull ancient texts from Greece, India, and Persia. They're translating Aristotle, Euclid, and Sanskrit medical texts into Arabic. But they aren't just acting as human photocopiers. They are critiquing, testing, and innovating upon the knowledge.
Exactly. Let's look at the mechanics of this intellectual boom. You have a society where the religion itself commands the seeking of knowledge. They needed precise mathematics to calculate inheritance laws and the direction of Mecca for prayer.
So you get figures like Al-Khwarizmi, who synthesizes Greek geometry with Indian numerology to practically invent algebra. The very word comes from his book, Al-Jabr. He introduces the Indian concept of zero to the wider world, fundamentally changing mathematics forever.
And in medicine, you have Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna. He writes the Canon of Medicine, which categorizes diseases, introduces clinical trials, and becomes the standard medical textbook in European universities for 600 straight years.
You have Al-Biruni using advanced trigonometry to calculate the exact circumference of the Earth with shocking accuracy, missing the modern measurement by only a few dozen miles, all while Europe was still largely struggling in actual darkness. They built observatories, they invented surgical instruments, they advanced optics.
But history shows us that all golden ages eventually attract predators. As the centuries passed, the Abbasid political power fragmented. The empire broke into smaller regional emirates, though they still nominally recognized the caliph in Baghdad. But they were politically weak. And in the 13th century, out of the eastern steppes comes an apocalyptic threat, Hulagu Khan and the Mongol army.
The year 1258. It is a trauma on par with Karbala, but on a civilizational scale. The Mongols surround Baghdad. They breach the walls, and the sack of the city is absolute. They don't just conquer, they obliterate. Hundreds of thousands of civilians. The caliph is rolled in a carpet and trampled to death by horses because Mongols believed spilling royal blood on the earth was bad luck.
And the intellectual destruction was devastating. The Mongols destroyed the House of Wisdom. The historical accounts tell us they took the centuries of accumulated knowledge, the medical texts, the philosophy, the mathematics, and threw so many books into the Tigris River to create a bridge for their horses that the water literally ran black with ink for days and red with blood. The physical and intellectual heart of the Islamic world was ripped out.
The empire is in ashes, but the fascinating thing is that the idea survives. The religion proves more durable than the state. Even the Mongols themselves, who conquered the Islamic lands, eventually assimilate and convert to Islam. But the political banner has to pass to someone new to rebuild the structure. And that brings us to our final act, the Ottomans, and the fulfillment of an ancient promise.
In 1299, as the dust of the Mongol invasions is settling, a man named Osman Ghazi founds a small, modest principality in Anatolia. The banner of leadership officially passes from the Arabs and Persians to the Turks. They rebuild the momentum of the civilization, not just with military might, but with an incredibly highly organized, pragmatic state structure.
Which culminates in 1450. We have to talk about Mehmet the Conqueror. He is only 21 years old. He looks across the Bosphorus at Constantinople, the impenetrable capital empire. This is a city that had defied and had massive Muslim armies for 8 centuries. Its triple walls were legend.
The Byzantine defenses were brilliant. They included massive stone walls on land, and they had stretched a giant, heavy iron chain across the mouth of the Golden Horn Harbor, physically preventing any Ottoman ships from attacking the weaker sea walls. It was an engineering stalemate.
But Mehmet is an engineer and a tactical genius. He realizes he can't break the chain. So what does he do? He bypasses water entirely. In the dead of night, he orders his engineers to build a pathway of greased wooden logs over the steep hills of Galata. He then has his troops physically pull dozens of heavy war galleys out of the water, drag them up and over the land, and slide them back into the water behind the...
Imagine the psychological terror of the Byzantines. They wake up in the morning, look out at their secure harbor, and find the Ottoman fleet sitting right outside their vulnerable seawalls. It was a logistical miracle that broke the spirit of the defense. The city finally falls. Mehmet takes eastern Rome.
And Mehmet's ambition was staggering. He didn't just want Istanbul for its wealth. He called Rome the Red Apple. He saw himself not just as a Muslim sultan, but as the Kaiser Arum, the Caesar of... He wanted to unite the entire Mediterranean under a new Islamic Roman Empire.
His successors pushed that vision to its absolute limit. Yavuz Sultan Selim sweeps south, conquers Egypt and the holy cities of Mecca and Medina, officially claiming the title of Caliph for the Ottoman Sultan. And then his son, Suleiman the Magnificent, pushes the Ottoman armies all the way deep into Europe, laying siege to the gates. The Ottomans become the undisputed superpower of the early modern world.
But it's not just the military push into Europe that's fascinating. If we ask how they managed to hold vast Christian territory like the Balkans for centuries without constant, massive rebellion, the answer isn't just the edge of a sword, it was administration.
It was justice and pragmatism. Consider the alternative in Europe. A peasant in the Balkans was a serf, essentially the legal property of a local feudal Christian lord, taxed to the bone and tied to the land. If you belonged to a minority Christian sect, you were persecuted as a heretic by the central church. When the Ottomans arrived, they brought a systematic, centralized legal code and significantly lower taxes.
And they implemented what is known as the millet system. Let's explain how this functioned day to day for a Christian in the Ottoman Empire.
The millet system was a form of structured religious pluralism. The Ottoman state said to the Christian and Jewish communities, pay a specific tax, the jizya. In return, you are exempt from military conscription, you are guaranteed protection by the state, and most importantly, your bishop or your rabbi is now your local governor for all civil matters. They were allowed to self-govern their own laws regarding marriage, inheritance, and education. For many Balkan peasants, Ottoman rule was a massive upgrade in personal freedom and economic stability compared to European feudalism.
They created a global integrated system. It was so vast and unified that a traveler like Ibn Battuta could walk from the shores of Morocco all the way to the islands of Indonesia and be under the exact same overarching legal framework, trading with similar currency, operating under the same protection.
It was the ultimate geopolitical and administrative synthesis of the message that began with one man in a dark cave.
And just like that, looking at the scope of what we've covered, we've done it. In this one deep dive, we have traveled from a brutally dark, idol-worshipping desert society burying its own children in the 6th century, navigated the miraculous birth of a state in Medina, suffered the agonizing civil wars of the early caliphs, marveled at the cosmopolitan, scientific genius of Baghdad, and stood before the triumphant, cannon-battered walls of
And if we synthesize everything we have discussed, the most remarkable takeaway is the resilience of the core idea. Despite all the crushing human ambition, the political manipulations, the dynastic collapses, and the apocalyptic invasions from Mongols and Crusaders, the core message, that singular, terrifying voice in the cave demanding absolute equality, justice, and submission to one creator, somehow survived. It outlived the empires that tried to exploit it, continually adapting and reshaping human society.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to ponder. As we've seen today, history shows a very clear, almost mathematical pattern. Whenever these massive Islamic empires adhered closely to the Prophet's original Medina charter, focusing on justice, pluralism, and the protection of the vulnerable, they flourished intellectually, economically, but whenever they strayed from it, whenever they relied on racial superiority like the Umayyads, or descended into elite luxury and corruption, they inevitably fractured and collapsed.
It forces us to ask a question of our own moderns. Is the true strength and longevity of a civilization really found in the size of its armies, the wealth of its elite, and the reach of its conquest? Or is it ultimately found in the moral integrity of its foundation and how it...
A question that is just as relevant and urgent today as it was in the year 622. Thank you for joining us on this massive, epic journey through history. This has been the